What a weird edition of the True Podcast today with no David Thorpe and no Gerard Hector. I'm Henry Abbott, and this is Steve Magness. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great. How are you, Henry?
Good, good. We're going to talk about this book, Win the Inside Game. But let me introduce you a little bit. So I think I have this right. You are dad of a 2-year-old
Yes, 2-year-old and a 1-month-old.
and
So
a 1 month old.
life is hectic here.
You're a coach.
Correct.
How many hours a week is that?
It varies a lot.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's full time. Sometimes it's like, hey, everything's kind of on autopilot.
You're the co-founder of The Growth Equation,
Correct.
which is no small commitment, it seems to me.
No newsletter, podcast, kind of
Mhm.
small multimedia stuff
Mhm.
all over the place.
You also are exercising enough that you recently pushed a stroller running a 5-minute mile. 5-minute mile with a stroller.
I gotta have some fun. My daughter loves going fast, so
Yeah,
I gotta stay in good enough shape to push her fast.
just good dadding right there. Yeah, yeah. So I think this is to me maybe superfluous, but kind of the reason to believe that what's in this book is true is because you've done a lot of homework and research. But also, come on, if you talk about like the subtitle is how to move from surviving to thriving and free yourself up to perform, like you're kind of doing that, right? Like you're doing a lot every day. Do you feel that way?
I mean, we write the books we need.
Yeah,
So,
okay, I got you.
like this is what you do. You say, "Hey, I've struggled with this. I'm trying to figure this out, and here's what I've learned." And I think that this is where the good stuff happens. Whether it's we're talking about sports performance or mental performance or everything in between, is like we have to marry not just the research and the evidence and studies, but it's got to apply to the real world. And I
Yeah.
think that's what I try and get at is like I test these ideas and then I see them with world class performers and in what they show me and what I see in working with them.
Yeah, yeah. Um, and there's the beginning of the intro is very rooted in this like I feel like you're like a very nice guy and everybody likes you, but you were in this very uncomfortable position at Nike, right? Where you became in 2012 a whistleblower with PED and the running program and that seems like it feels to me a little like this book's been kind of simmering ever since that. Is that fair?
Absolutely. I mean, you're spot on. This is why you're good, Henry. But it has, and I think in many ways this is. I've always wanted to write this book. I just needed the time and space and perspective to do so
Hmm.
because it talks about my experience there. And for a while, I would say that was a combination of this weird feeling of like my most shameful time period
Yeah.
because it sucked. And as you read in the book, I did some things that I'm not proud of. But it was also my proudest moment because I also came through on the other side and said, like, screw it, let's risk everything, career, livelihood, financial security, and let's just do the right thing. So it has this weird, place in my own world that I think applies to other people. So this book was almost like a let's make sense of it and explore it.
There's like it feels to me like there's like a child's dream version of sports where it's like we're just all on the team and the team's all great and everything's moving in the same direction, right? Like, and I guess that erodes in different ways for different people, right? But you had like a hard stop of like you cannot go along with the team, right? Like you had to become briefly a pariah, maybe, right? Like, and then this book sort of navigate. There's this phrase. I'm just consulting my notes here. Oh yeah, connection and belonging without fusing. What does that mean?
So here's the deal: is if you look at the research and you look at everything, is we are born to belong and connect. We want to be part of groups, and it makes sense because, like, millennia ago, if we were on the savannah and a lion or tiger or snake came upon us or whatever, and we were by ourselves, we were screwed,
Yeah,
right? We needed the tribe to not only manage difficult things, but also just to live and survive. And because of that, right, we have this deep-seated, need to connect with others. The problem is this is that we were kind of built for a society where we knew everybody and we could
Mm-hmm.
feel that connection with genuine connection.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're in this society where it makes us feel like, hey, we can connect with anybody. I can follow people on Twitter and Instagram and listen to them on a podcast, and I feel like I'm connected, but I'm really not. It's
Mm-hmm.
superficial. So what happens is sometimes we latch on to or like fuse our identity with groups to
Mm-hmm.
get this sense of security, to deal with that, like, hey, I need to connect and I don't feel like I'm connecting. I'm feeling a little bit lonely. So I fuse with the groups. You see this in politics all the time. You see this in sport, right? When people literally live and die by, their favorite team. And I'm a fan of teams. I get it. I'm passionate about sports. But if you're literally ruining your day and can't function as a human being because your team lost some meaningless series, the day before, like, what is that but identity fusing with this group, which means your emotions and your everything else goes on the roller coaster with them.
Did you feel like fused with the Nike Oregon project?
Absolutely, for a
Yeah.
while.
Yeah.
Because what happens is you get stuck in it,
Yeah.
right? And what happens is your individual goals or dreams or beliefs and ethics get subsumed by the groups.
Mm-hmm.
So if I go into the thing and say, hey, I want to do sport the right way and let's explore what people are capable of. Well, if everybody else around you is sending the message, win at all costs, like that's it.
Mm-hmm.
Win whatever we have to do.
Mm-hmm.
What happens is you start to believe it. You start to internalize it because that is the message your brain is getting over and over and over again. So eventually it says, okay, like this is the new belief system. This is what
Mm-hmm.
we do. And I think to a degree, absolutely, I fell into that where you start saying, like, everybody around me is saying this is the way. If we want to win that Olympic gold medal, like we got to go. And you kind of ask yourself, do you want to coach an Olympic gold medalist? Of course. Like
That'd be
who
kind of fun. Yeah.
who would say no to that question?
Yeah. Yeah.
And if everything around you is saying this is the way, then you just kind of fall in line with it.
And it's, I guess, if you buy a new car, let's say you kind of spend a lot of money on a new car, and when you're driving it a week later, it has a little something that you don't like, right? It's not very common that the person will be like, well, I soberly assessed that this car is not quite what I thought it was. Like, instead, your brain's like, no, 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 no. Like, that's not happening, right? Like, this car's perfect. And I'll just kind of not think about that one thing, right? I feel like buying a car is a tiny identity thing compared to taking a job at Nike with elite runners, right? Like, I feel like it's a very big social force to be around all of these elite athletes and these legendary coaches who are all aiming at this win at all costs thing, right? It makes perfect sense to me that you would just kind of set aside some of your concerns, right?
Yeah, and that's what we do all the freaking time.
Yeah, yeah,
It's because, and it's ingrained in us. Like,
yeah,
if you look at the psychology, we have a literal psychological immune system,
yeah,
which role is simply to protect our ego and protect ourselves. So if you spend a lot of money, or alternatively, you invest a whole time of hard work and effort into this thing, and someone says, hey, it's kind of broke, it doesn't quite work the way it is, you're most likely going to be like, no, no, you don't know what you're talking about, man. This
yeah,
is perfect. I've spent
yeah.
my life like working on this. And that is simply to protect your ego, is protect yourself. And it's just part of who we are. And it's really hard to resist and go against that.
There's this line, this kind of like had my eyes popping out of my head. Tribe determines morality more than morality determines tribe. It's a great time for us to talk about abortion in the Southern Baptist, isn't it, Steve?
We're just going down the rabbit hole here.
But like, that's a big, I mean, we think about you make this unimpeachable case about tribe, right? Like, we're wired for it because we needed it, and it still is how our brains are designed, right? And how we interact. But it's like this, like, oh my gosh, it's not even really like coming from us. We're more just kind of like the tribe just kind of tells us what our morality is.
Yeah, and that's exactly what researchers found. It's kind of mind blowing because we walk around with this story in our head of like, I determine my values and beliefs, and then I'm going to pick my tribe to join and belong to because of those. And it might
Yeah.
start a little bit like that, but what quickly happens is you go where your tribe goes. And the Southern Baptist is the great example, because if you look at in the 1960s, they literally put out a proclamation that says, from the top of the top, that said, like, we want a middle ground on like abortion. Meaning, like, of course they weren't like all pro-choice, but it was like a middle ground. This is what this is about. And if you look now, they're like one of the most hardline religious groups. And how did we get there? In a couple years, it all flipped, because like the leadership changed and people said, hey, this is what we believe, we're going to go like hard line on this. And then the entire congregation, everybody's views flipped on it within a couple years. Did everyone have a shift in morality in a few years?
It seems unlikely to me. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not likely, because that's not what happens. And that's just like one of the most profound examples. But if you look at hot button topics, or even, taking away from religion, even ideas around, performance or other things, is generally we go where the group goes. And if the group switches 180, like, we're more likely to switch 180 than say, hey, wait a minute, like 5 years ago, I was proclaiming this.
Yeah. Yeah. So what's the formula to wriggle out of that? Like, how do you not just go along with the group?
It's really freaking hard. So
Yeah.
step one is like awareness that this occurs. You've
Hmm.
got to understand that, like, this is what it is. Step two is you've got to, whatever group you belong to, or tribe or team or what have you, you've got to have things that essentially, psychologists call it expand yourself, but it's essentially give you perspective. So ways to create space between who you are and what you do, or who you are and where you belong. And the more you can do that by doing things like, diversifying your friend groups, diversifying your groups, diversifying your sources of meaning, or even your roles or jobs. What in sport, you see this all the time, which is, if we intertwine our identity with our sport, so an athlete only sees themselves as like, I am a basketball player and I have nothing else in my life, essentially, like, this is it, I'm all in on this. It sounds like, oh, this is going to be a great player because they're all in, this is all they care about. But what research tells us is that A, they're going to be more likely for burnout. B, they're going to go wherever the group goes. So if everybody's cheating, they're going to start cheating, okay, and have less ethics. And I think C is they're not going to perform as well. Research tells us that being able to, what often athletes call is like, take the jersey off.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
like all in when you're at game time in practice, but like the jersey comes off and you're like, hey, I'm husband, dad, or whatever at home, at least until I watch film or whatever the next thing is. Like, the more we're able to do that, creates a little bit of space. We don't go just where the group is, and we perform better over the long haul, and don't get burned out.
Yeah, we get in the NBA, we just revere OCD, right? There's just kind of like crazy all in. And like, remember, like Kyrie Irving was on a Zoom with some politician in the pandemic, and everyone's like basically, shouldn't he be working on his jumper? You know what I mean? It just seems like the guy could go on a Zoom. I remember Steve Kerr once said something like he thinks his players should like surf once in a while, or just like do other real world things. And it seems so blatantly useful. If I were the child of an NBA player, I'd be like, please play for Steve Kerr. Right? Like, it seems so blatantly useful, but like everyone just takes it as like, that seems kind of weird.
So here it is. But I faced this. I faced this exactly. No, I didn't have quite Steve Kerr, but I had someone close,
Yeah.
tell me this. Is when I was a phenom athlete, 4-minute miler in high school. Never got any better, mostly because I was all in. Like, I didn't
Yeah.
care about anything. Grade, school. I literally went to college not caring about what grades were. I was like, I just want to run. Like,
Yeah.
forget class. Like, just
Did you
run.
do the thing? I know some people would like just sit all day and keep their feet up all day just so like you wouldn't tie yourself by
Oh,
walking around
oh yeah.
campus.
I,
Yeah.
I watched way too many movies and watched way too many and played way too many video games because I was like,
Yeah.
I am recovering. I worked
Yeah.
out hard. I'm not doing anything. Like I was all in of all in. Okay.
Yeah.
But it backfires. And I remember my I think it was my freshman year of college. I sat down with this world class sports psychologist who I happened to just connect with, and he worked with NBA players, MLB, a bunch of people you would know, and he also happened to work with a couple of Olympic level track athletes. And then he listened to my story, and he said, "Steve, let me tell you about so and so." And he said the name, and I recognized it instantly, and was one of the best runners in the world.
Hmm.
And he said, she struggled in college making that jump to pro to get to that Olympic Games. Like the first go round, she struggled and missed it. But now she's one of the best in the world, competing for Olympic champs and medals. Do you know what the key was? And I said, no idea. And here I am, 19-year-old Steve, thinking, I'm about to get the secret,
Yeah.
man.
Here's the magic. Yeah.
Here it is. And he looks me dead in the eye and he says, knitting.
Awesome.
And I'm like, what in the world is this? But he explained, he was like, she was so focused on the workout. She'd do the workout, obsessed before it,
Yeah.
obsessed during it. Afterwards, she'd think of like, okay, what did I do wrong? How do I get better? Thinking about next workout, not doing anything, but sitting on her couch and putting her feet up all day, not to ruin the next one. And it drove her mad because stress is stress. We're never having that period of time where we
Mhm.
stress our body, then recover so that we adapt and get better. And he said she started taking up knitting. It was a hobby she enjoyed. It took her mind off competing, and she found a group of other knitters who
Mhm.
should,
Mhm.
connect with, and that became the thing. Now, 19-year-old Steve didn't listen to it. He brushed it off, like Steve Kerr telling us go surfing.
Yeah.
But the reality is, and there's data to back this up, that it's true. I mean, when researchers looked at the Nobel Prize winning scientists, so we're not talking sports, but like literally the best scientists of all time to win a Nobel, right?
Mhm.
They had more hobbies and leisure activities unrelated to the science
Mhm.
than the people who were a rung or two below, who were
Mhm.
still really good scientists, but were freaking all in and didn't have hobbies or leisure activities. Something like 10 times more likelihood to have a significant hobby in their life when you want it for Nobel winners. Why? Because like all in sounds good and we need it for specific periods of time, but if we can't turn it off, we're eventually like that stress is going to get us and we're going to burn out.
I mean, David Epstein. Oh my gosh, I happen to have the book right here. And maybe I can find the little chart in the sports gene here, but I'm pretty sure that you know this chart, which is like the number of hours you practice at like age 12, right? When that goes up, it reduces the number of hours you practice at age 17. I think I'm right in saying.
Yep.
Perhaps I can't find it fast enough, but that seems like this undergirds just a little bit, right? Like these are, I know the parents of that 12-year-old, right? Like I know the messages. I've seen them. My kids were in sports with those parents, right? And like I feel like it's there's so many reasons. I guess we pile on these parents all the time, right? But the data just doesn't have their backs on like really driving your kid, your 12, 13, 14-year-old to like obsess over one sport to get the college scholarship or whatever. Like those kids are burning out, right? They're just, it's not what they wanted to do. It's not for the right reasons. They have identity issues around it. And like, they don't knit enough, I guess, is really where we land.
Well, but that's yes, that's what they need. We need more 12-year-olds knitting. But
If we take one thing from this podcast,
this is it. This is the cure for everything, Henry. More knitting. I'm about to take it up myself. My 2-year-old, we're going all in on
get on
knitting
it.
early.
Yep. Yep.
Uh,
It's
but
just knitting though, right? There's no other,
yeah,
yeah.
that's it. That's
Yeah.
it. No,
Yeah.
that's the lesson. But then this is the thing, okay? Because if you go and we have again Epstein's book, fantastic, and it outlines that. But we have so much data, and it's not just sports. But from sports, if you look at it, if you look at prodigies and phenoms and things like math or chess or other things, the wonderful psychologist studied Ellen Winter studied all of them and said, "Hey, you know what? What allows those prodigies to turn into people who do great? Intrinsic motivation, not
Mm-hmm.
parental control, not feeling
Mm-hmm.
like you're forced." And the reason is pretty
Mm-hmm.
simple: is if you go all in early, you cement your literal identity around that thing because, well, everyone else is saying, hey, I'm going to try soccer, football, chess club, math, whatever, reading. Like you're just like, this is it, basketball. And when your whole
Mhm.
entire identity is the thing, guess what? It makes you fragile because
Mhm.
you live or die by every loss. You live or die by how you are ranked, whether you're making progress. You mistakenly think that your parental, approval comes from the sport itself. And
Mhm.
that's a hell of a way to live life for a 12, 13, 14-year old. And you've seen it. I've seen it. I've talked to those parents. I've coached athletes who went through that stuff, and it is a literal a hopeful rewiring of their brain and their motivation and their like attitude, and to get them out of that fear state in order to
Mhm.
get them to perform at their best. So it's one of these things where I think we get fooled by the short term because look, I'll tell you point blank, if you take a 12-year-old and you train them a lot, they're going to be one of the best 12-year-olds because other 12-year-olds aren't training that much.
Mhm.
But as soon as those other 12-year-olds who have pretty good talent, and if they have the right motivation, start training at 16, 17, 18, your kid is going to fall behind because, like, he has the wrong motivation and he's been training really hard for too long.
Mhm. Mhm. And also I pity that kid who's, like, tall at 12, but then, like, short at 16. It's like, you're that kid's also doing the basketball. But, like, um, the best player in my 8th grade was, Steve Spitznagel. Shout out to Steve, great guy. But he was a regular sized kid in 8th grade. He dominated. He was
Yeah.
dominated. And then, he changed schools, didn't see him, and then I went to a movie with a friend when I was, like, a senior in high school, and my friend like knocked into some guy I knew in the lobby of the movie, and he's like, "Hey, you know who that was?" I think I was like, "That was Steve Spitznagel." I'm like, "He's still 5'3". I'm like, "Oh no, oh no, oh no." Maybe he's taller than 5'3", but he was definitely like the same height he'd been in 8th grade, right? And I was like, "Oh, this sucks." It sucks that he identifies as a basketball player. You know what I mean? Like,
And that's the thing, is like, this is the thing that we never know where we're gonna go. So
yeah,
if we narrow those paths early, what
yeah,
happens is we literally block out potential paths that might be where our talent and our drive actually align. Like maybe he wasn't gonna be a great basketball player, but maybe that, I don't know, that ability to hustle or whatever would have made
right,
him a pretty good cross country runner, or
right,
something else like was there if he wasn't, cemented along like, I'm
yeah.
going to be a basketball player and this is it. And I think we have to like realize and recognize that so that again, we can help our kids, find their thing.
So I think about there was a moment in professional basketball where Elena Della Don, I hope I'm saying her name right, um, quit. Right, she was one of the best basketball players in the world, and I think there was some family trauma. Maybe her sister was diagnosed with something. I forget, but she quit. She quit basketball, and I felt like in real time you could see the psyches rattled, right? Because like so many people in the sport were like, we are on rails here, right? And like we agree we do not get off this train, right? And she did get off the train. And then she got back on the train on her schedule later and has been a wonderful pro ever since, right? And I feel like that is, if you think about the overcoached 12-year-old and how they evolve, and maybe they get the college scholarship but hate the sport or whatever, or get injuries, whatever, all these things that happen. I feel like this is the model of like, hey, just you can walk away, right? You can, and then you can, maybe you'll come back better.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that that makes sense, right? And we know this from a kind of recovery standpoint too, from a mental standpoint, is like if you keep beating your head against the wall, you're not going to force your way to maybe find that motivation or either like deal with the stress that you have.
Hmm.
Sometimes you've got to have the ability to step back. And I think, often in those situations where it's like these are the rails, no one leaves them, I think it actually takes a lot of courage to step off the rails,
Big time.
because everybody is saying like, what are you doing? Like, this is the dream, this is my dream, I'm putting that on you. And she's saying like, hey, in my life, like right now, like, this isn't it. So I've got to step back. And the thing is, we can almost always come back to the thing. And in fact, an athlete that I coached did this, and it had phenomenal success. So a
Mm.
lady named Roberta Groner
Hmm.
ran at a high level in high school in college, was ran a little after, was burned out. And guess what? She stepped back, had kids, and then literally in her late 30s, so it was like an
Awesome.
8 or 9 year gap, started
Mhm.
coming back to running and then ended, well, she still competes, but her highlight was at the age of freaking 41. She was sixth at the Marathon World Championships
No way.
after
Awesome.
taking like 8 years off, and people are like, what are you doing? And she just got back into it. It's like, hey, this is fun. I enjoy running now. I don't have to do it because, my college coach or whatever is yelling and screaming at me. I don't feel compelled to do it. I want
Mhm.
to do it. And she achieved a crazy amount. Would she have gotten there if she just said, hey, I'm going to keep pressing on? I'm going to keep pressing on? Probably not,
Probably
because
not.
the
Yeah.
bucket wasn't full, right?
Mhm. That's funny. So I was on this relay team of the runners who were much more accomplished than me. We were all 40-ish, 38 to 45, something like that. And we won. We'd win this relay across New Jersey because I mean, some of them were really freaking sick runners, but then we were having our little like after race meal, and we're looking out the window, and this one guy was like, "Hey Henry, did you run like continuously like from high school all through?" And I was like, "No, man, I had like 15 years I didn't run at all." And he's like, "Yeah, that's why you feel good today, right?" He's like, look around the room. He's like, you know, Gary over here never stopped running. Like, and look, he's like got ice packs, everything, like he's like, I really think the people who are running well, like 42, 43, like probably didn't run all the way through.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's like, it's the balance of the thing,
Yeah.
right? Is we have to balance stress with recovery, both physical and
Hmm.
mental. And if we're constantly beating our head against the wall, we might like look good on social media. We might be able to post like, 5 a.m. grind again on Instagram, but the reality is sometimes that gets in the way. I'm always reminded of one of the best runners in history, Bernard Lagat, who won multiple Olympic medals, world champion for the US. Is at the end of the season, he would take like every year, it was something like 2 or 3 months off,
Oh
which for
wow.
for a runner is unheard of because our
Yeah.
seasons are long. You can always compete. That's where the money is in competing. So to take like 3 months off where it's just like, I'm
He
not going
wouldn't
to
run
do
at all.
anything. No. And
Wow.
and you're just like, what? But he was literally one of the best in the world from like, I don't know, 20 to 40. He was still competing at a high level. And I think that's part of the reason, is because they want to do it, but they don't have that like that compulsion of like, oh, if I don't do this now, like I'm gonna be done for. And like
Hmm.
that compulsion almost comes out of insecurity, right? And what they're able to realize is, hey, big picture, sure, it might take me a little bit longer to get in back in shape, but I know how to get in shape, and I'm going to be rejuvenated both
Hmm.
physically and mentally to be able to do so. Versus over here, if I keep grinding and keep, let that insecurity drive, I might be hanging by a thread by the end of the season.
I feel like I have seen a little bit of this play out. So my dad was a marathoner. Um, he wasn't particularly fast, but he ran something like 40, 50 marathons in his life. And he had his little routine, right? He would follow the protocol and he'd go and meet for the speed workouts on the track with his buddies and stuff. And, but when it got close to marathon day, and we did a few together, which was nice, he's no longer with us. So I'm glad we did this. But, like he would get so effing particular about his like 48 hours before, where it's like, and he wanted like, we'd be pulling over, like he would need carbs at a certain time, whatever. There's so many protocols. And his poor my mother-in-law would like have to run all over the course with like Red Bull that he wanted at certain mile markers and stuff. It was like so high maintenance, right? And I thought that was maybe just how marathoning was, right? And then I started running with other people who were just like, so it seemed like very free and confident, where they were like, maybe they would have a beer the night before. Like, what? My dad would do that. Like, or they'd like stay up late or deal with some weird new equipment, or like just they just had like this supreme confidence, like that they were adaptable, they were going to deal with whatever, right? And which felt to me a little like Ellen Deladon being like, no, I'll figure out a life without basketball. Or it feels to me like this super on the grind thing is anxiety, right? It feels like there is a timidity in that, right? My dad was fearful that if he didn't get checked into the hotel in a smooth way early in the day, then he would like never be able to finish the marathon. It's like, I don't think we're that delicate.
It, it, it's, are you creating fragility or resilience?
Right.
And I think often some of the things that can help, for instance, like, hey, we know, like, a routine will help you get prepared and mentally primed to do the thing. But if that routine becomes a ritual, meaning if I don't do this step, if I don't put my socks on in this way, or if I forget my, lucky watch or whatever it is, like that anxiety takes over,
Mhm.
it's no longer helping us, right?
Mhm.
It's driven from insecurity. And I I, I think I think that's the thing.
Okay, so ordinarily this show is hosted by Gerard Hector, who's a real pro. And he's just producing today, and we were worried that I might forget to take a little break for that. So he just appeared. Hi, Gerard. Steve, you know what I think? In keeping with the message of the show, it's probably good for us to take a little
Let's take a break.
break. All right, we're back. So there's a part of your book that I found fascinating, which is about Urban Meyer, who, speaking of this fragility, right? Like, well, you tell it.
I mean, again, no hate towards Urban Mile,
Yeah,
but
yeah, yeah. Have a little hate. Go for
yeah, okay,
it.
I'll have some hate. All right, here's the deal. Here's the deal. Like, if you look at his interviews and you look at it, he hates to lose,
Yeah.
right? And he has these quotes, and I put them in the book. But it is like, I can't function when I lose. Like my kids, my family, like can't even think about them, right? And often what happens is we hold this up as like, oh, look how much he cares. Like
Mhm,
this is what it takes. And it's like, no, no, this is the sign of like this insecurity driving the ship. This is fear driving the ship. This is not how you learn to lose. And there's data and research behind this, because think of it. Okay, what happens when we lose a game? Okay, our body has a stress response because losing sucks. So what happens is we feel a little bit of cortisol because, you know, losing, if we're either athlete or coach, like it hits us a little bit. It hits our sense of self. We lose a little, maybe even self-worth or confidence. Like it didn't go as we wanted to. So cortisol goes up. And what research tells us is if that cortisol stays up and lingers for too long, we get stuck in this kind of, I'm going to play not to lose. I'm performing out of fear. And it affects us, especially in athletes, it affects us the next week in the next game. So if that cortisol stays elevated, we literally play worse a week later. There's been studies on professional rugby players that have shown this. And interestingly enough, I didn't put this in the book, but it's fascinating. The science is kind of young, but there's some research that shows that this is also how one of the mechanisms how PTSD develops.
Oh.
So if you suffer through something very traumatic and your stress level stays up and you don't like have a way to alleviate it, then you're more likely to experience PTSD. They originally discovered this by people going through a traumatic experience, and they showed up to the hospital and they were tracking, vitals and all this stuff. The people whose heart rate was still elevated, I forget, like an hour later, were more
Hmm.
likely to have PTSD. Those who had experienced the same similar thing but heart rate came down were less likely to. Why? Because it's this stress response thing where it's like our brain internalizes and ingrains that this thing sucks. Be very wary of it. Avoid it. Don't put yourself in this situation ever again. So it's almost like
Mhm,
traumatic response.
mhm,
What research tells us is if, hey, we can take care of that, meaning we feel that loss, and instead of it making us miserable, we go get beers with our friends, right? We have a good meal, we socialize with others so that we can kind of process and let it go. Our stress response shifts.
mm,
So we hang out with others, we get an increase in the hormone oxytocin, which is a bonding hormone. What that does is it brings that cortisol down. Other research tells us that we flip it in terms of cortisol goes down, testosterone goes up, which when testosterone goes up, we're more likely to, want to compete again. Our desire to get back in the arena goes up.
mhm,
So we should do the opposite of Urban Meyer. We shouldn't be miserable. We should not want to go hang out with our kids. we should do things like hang out with our kids or family or have a beer or let go a little bit, because that's going to help us perform not only in the next week or game, but like over the long haul.
And then I can't remember the phrase that's in the book, but it's something about this kind of like downward spiral that he went through. Because he went to, so he was a legend in college coaching, and then he went to the
Yeah.
NFL and was not a legend.
It was
Like
not.
and he kind of just shattered, right? He
It,
just, yeah.
and the reason is simple. It's like when you're used to winning and you hate losing, and all of a sudden you get reality smacks you in the face, right? Because you're going somewhere new and it's your
Hmm.
first year and you're probably on a team that's not very good, right? The record of the team he took over was not good coming in. He had some talented players, but they weren't good. You should expect, hey, I've never been in this situation. It might take a year or two or a couple years to turn things around. But when fear and hatred of losing is driving that ship and your self-worth is tied entirely to the thing, then
Hmm.
what happens all the way back to what we talked about at the beginning is when we start losing, your psychological immune system kicks in and
Mm.
your brain goes, protect your ego, protect yourself, protect your self-worth. So he went on this, he didn't even last the full first season. He went on this, tirade where he's like, hey, I'm going to blame the players. I'm going to sit all my coaches down and ask them, are you a winner? Show me where you've won before, because
What
here's
a
all the games
dick.
I've
I mean,
won.
what a dick.
All that is ego protection,
So
because
crazy.
like you're getting your ass kicked, and that again, it spirals out of control. So we have the wrong ideas even in the elite side. Sometimes we just get it, and it goes all the way back to something my high school coach told me way back when I was an athlete, which essentially holds true. And he said, Steve, you got to learn how to not get too high on the highs and not too low on the lows,
Hmm.
and that's it.
Hmm. Well, we have this weird, I don't understand why. Okay, so I know like Lee Iacocca had a certain like my way or the highway leadership style that I understand has just completely drummed out of business, right? Like, everyone knows that was just a sort of mansplaining mistake, right? Um, and so now there's tons of research, right, from all these places about like how you lead by making it a safe place for people to experiment with new ideas and try new things, and but in sports we still just love this idea. Like sports will be for sure, maybe the military will be like the last place for the like, oh no, he just screamed at everybody. It was great leadership. Like, why do we love that so much in sports?
We just because it feels, I think because it feels good as the coach to a degree.
It's just emotionally satisfying to
No, it
just,
is. So
yeah,
here, okay, I've coached for a long time, and for a while
yeah,
I coached college, professional athletes. But anytime I felt the urge to just like light into somebody,
yeah,
and I stopped and I thought about it, I'm like, why am I doing this? Oh, it's
yeah,
because I'm angry, I'm upset, like I'm frustrated that we lost. And what's gonna make me feel good in this moment? Releasing that to the world. Which
yeah,
means like just light into everybody around. It's not about the change. It's about dealing with that yourself, I think is a large degree. And then I think the other part of it is, well, let me step back, is the military is changing. Not all the way,
hmm,
but I've been fortunate over the last couple of years to talk to, Naval Academy, US Marines, Army. And you talk to some of the generals in there and they're like, yeah, we've done a lot of stupid shit, you know.
that's
And,
awesome that they say that.
and,
Yeah,
and they're also like, we've done some good stuff,
yeah,
but like we need to adapt and grow, and they're open to adapt and grow. And now, of course, the military's always going to have some sort of like control, because they need to, right? Because they're going to freaking war, right? They
yeah,
need you to obey commands. Sport
right.
isn't war, but they also understand like, hey, we got to have this balance here. And I think in sport, sometimes we forget that. And I think the other reason is I was actually told this by a NFL general manager who won a Super Bowl a long time ago when I was in grad school. But he said essentially, the cheap way to authority is to force it.
Hmm.
So if you're a coach and you're like, okay, how do I get the authority here? The cheap way is to just like be copy Bobby Knight, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
The hard way is to earn it.
Right.
To be like,
Mark
you should,
Gagno.
yeah, you should trust me because I'm
Yeah,
gonna help you get better.
right.
And that takes time because you have to build trust. And I think that's also probably why we don't go towards it as much, because like it takes time to develop, and it's a lot easier to just be like, you know what, I'm just gonna MF these guys all day long and hope they fall into line.
Well, there's a I didn't grow up with, coaches like that, really. I guess lucky, but I've noticed a lot of people did. Tons of people did, right? Grew up with some kind of like knockoff Bobby Knight,
Yeah.
and I've noticed that as a parent, there'll be, like this kid's leaving this swim team to go to that swim team because this swim team doesn't really coach hard enough, and then they like it look to my eyes like they literally gravitate to the asshole coach because it's an asshole coach, right? Because like the parents feel like without having that level of machismo or take chargeness or something, like they're not getting the full experience or something. Like I was like, why are you guys fans of this? That seems weird to me.
Yeah, it's strange, but it's just like in parenting. Like if you look at the research, if you were parented in that like, drill sergeant style, often you emulate it. I mean,
Yeah.
some people go in the other direction because they learn and grow, but a large percentage just emulate it because that's what they know. And they think like, oh, okay, well it was tough, but I turned out okay.
Hmm.
So maybe they need it. But I'm here to tell you, a couple years ago, some researchers studied this in the NBA, and they looked at coaches who were essentially like classified as the hard ass ones, and they said, "Hey, let's look at the long term impact of this."
Okay.
And they found that when a player, moved to a team with this hard ass coach, they committed more technical fouls,
Hmm.
so more aggressive fouls, and then their poor performance for the rest of their career took a slight notch
Oh
downwards.
god.
And the you could tell the results just by reading the paper title, which it was called "Scarred for the Rest of My Career."
Yeah.
And we have data on this, and it's hard for people to accept, but it's the reality. And now I'm not saying like, you can never kind of be firm, right? But what the data both on parenting and coaching tells us is that like if you're an authoritarian all the time, players just perform out of fear and it loses its power. If you like understand and maybe are more like Steve Kerr-ish, then what happens is when you need to like sometimes wield that stick if you have to, like people pay attention and are like, oh, okay, I better realign with our program and realign with our path because like this is serious.
Yeah, to your point about the military, I know that like they've had a hard time recruiting and they're not getting like all of these like high school quarterbacks anymore, right? Like they're and I'm David Thorpe, who's often on the show, like he is always talking about, okay, so your Bobby Knight style works for some athletes,
Yep.
but how many different kinds of athletes can you motivate becomes a big question if you're a basketball coach, right? Because you're gonna have a whole team full of people and you need to get them all playing at their best, right? And I feel like the military's a little bit in that now, right? Where it's where, yeah, maybe your Bobby Knight style can get the best out of the top 3 recruits or whatever, but you gotta get other you gotta get everybody performing at a high level, and that takes just a variety. It's like different gears in the car, right? Different approaches, different people. This is kind of it feels to me like the skill set's more like being like a 7th grade teacher,
Yep.
right? Where it's like, oh well, this one's a kinesthetic learner, this one, whatever. You have to kind of like
That
switch gears and adjust.
this is it. And I was going to use the teacher example too. Like if teachers just stood in front of the classroom and said like, "Hey, I'm just going to teach in this way," and like, the 25% of the class who gets it,
Right.
great, we're going to ace the test. The rest of you, you're screwed. Have
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah.
Like that teacher would not either celebrate or last long. And I think in coaching sometimes we do that. And the way I like to think of it is, and this is how I thought of it as a coach, is like I need to develop as many tools in the toolkit because I never know what I'm going to get and like how to get this kid to be motivated or show up and perform on game day or race day. And I need a bunch of tools. Some kids, I'll tell you, I remember when I was coaching college athletes, I had one kid who said, "Hey, coach, in the thick of the race, I need you to just cuss me out."
What?
And I'm just like, all right. Like, that's what you need? Like, we'll go for it. Now, most kids weren't like that, but every once in a while you'd get a kid like that, and you're just like, all right, if it works, we'll try it. And for him, it worked. He was all
I just hope
confident.
he's not side by side with another teammate. You know what I mean? Because then now you're a pickle.
Yeah, I am. No. Every time I'd cheer for this kid, I'd look around and be like, "Is my athletic director around here,
Totally,
or
totally.
or not?"
You're
Because
off in the woods at the cross
yeah,
country meet, so you can literally let it loose. Yeah.
that's it. So, but I think that gets at the point is like we need a diversity of tool sets to match with like the situation and the individual. And I would argue the really great coaches have this. Like they're able to coach the person sitting in front of them
Mhm.
instead of saying, "This is my style. This is all that I do. This is all that I learned. Like if you can't take it, get out of here." That doesn't work anymore, especially both from a military standpoint, but also if you look at college athletics where people can just like transfer all over the place, like,
Mhm.
it's no longer you're stuck here for years and like you better adapt. There's free reign. So you've
Mhm.
got to be able to meet the kid where they're at.
Well, I feel like you need to be kind of a magnet, right? They need to be drawn to you if they're going to stay for 4 years, right? And the other thing that's kind of, I don't know what happens at like the highest level of like the elite basketball football players. I guess they have a whole different set of things happening in the transfer portal. But in the kids that I know that grew up with my kids, right? Like they go in the transfer portal just to leave. Do you see what I'm saying? Like they're not going to a thing. They're just like, I don't like this one, right? I'm gonna roll the dice on a different one, which just seems so weird. It always feels weird to me, like to move away from a place. Like, no, I think you should move to a place, right? Like, you should decide where you want to go and go there. But it feels like they're just like, oh, this guy was kind of annoying, so it didn't work.
Yeah, no, that's how it is, and it's a very weird time in college athletics.
It
That you talk
is.
to college coaches, especially basketball coaches, and they're just like, "Oh my god, like what in the world is going on? What are we doing?" But that's often the case. It's like,
Yeah.
there's no destination. It's just like, sign me up. I'm gonna get out of here, not having any idea where I'm going.
Yeah. 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 So who's doing a great job of this? Like, did you come across kind of role models in winning the inside game?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of really good coaches and athletes, and even people in the military. As I said, one of my favorites was talking to some of these generals, especially the Naval Academy and Marine Corps, who were just like, "We get it." And my idea of especially the Marines was like, we're going to be drill sergeant hard ass and not
Hmm.
understand. But they're like, no, we literally we have to adapt, and if we don't, like, we're not going to be prepared for our mission. So I think that was like eye opening. And there's a litany of coaches, and the big ones, the Steve Kerrs, the Pete Carrolls. But what I've also found is interesting is that high school coaches are often like on the forefront of this because, and I talked to a lot of good high school coaches because they realize like, hey, high school kids have these pulls towards whatever social media, being an influencer, whatever, video games. Like, if I don't engage them and keep them engaged, like we're gonna lose them, even if they're good, even if they're pretty dang good, because there's so many more pulls than there used to be. And high school coaches are in the forefront, and that kind of gave me, I don't know, a little bit of hope, I think, because we have this idea of like high school coaches as being like the crazy football or gym coach who's just like, loses their mind. But I think more and more it's changing.
Yeah, well, that's good. Let's end on that optimistic note. I like that. Not so easy these days. You know what I mean? All
Uh,
right, so
yeah,
this is your book, Steve. It's called "Win the Inside Game." Is it out now?
it is out now.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Um, yeah, you feel good about it? You excited? Are you doing the whole book tour thing? What's going on?
Yeah, I'm doing the podcast. I'm doing the speaking. I'm
Yeah.
excited about it. You spend years writing a book, and then it goes into the world, and you have no idea what's going to happen or if it will resonate. But it's been very positive so far, and really, I
Great.
just I just want to help people think about these things on a performance scale. So if it interests you, check it out.
I just want to make fun of Urban Meyer, so we all got our goals met.
That's what it's all about. I'm with you.
All right, thanks a lot, Steve. Talk again soon.